Hello friends, and here we are again with Laws of the Soul webinar commentaries, number 22. We have just finished with a summary of the first four laws, and we're getting into the fifth, which is the law of group progress, page 174 of Esoteric Psychology, volume 2. And let's see where we are. I kind of had 10 minutes left at the end of the other program, and so went off on one of those little third-rate philosophical fugues. But now back to business. The law of group progress. The exoteric name is the law of group progress, but it's also called the law of elevation, which connects it, interestingly, with Capricorn. And its symbol is the mountain and the goat, which is very, in a way, similar to the symbol of Capricorn. The goat and the unicorn. It involves progressive energy, which certainly correlates with Capricorn, and it's ruled by the seventh ray. And it plays a big part in the factor of evolution. We know Capricorn has that ongoing energy, and the seventh ray coming through Uranus at this time, mainly through Uranus, and interestingly through Capricorn at this time, is itself a very progressive energy. It always finds, well, not always, but when it's not under its Saturnian mode, when it's under its Uranian mode, it finds new and better ways of doing things. So this is a law which is very much connected with the Aquarian age, and it kind of seems like it's preparing as well for the age of Capricorn. Okay, there may have been a wee bit of interference there, but as I say, the Capricorn part of this tells us that it may be preparing for the initiatory possibilities in the age of Capricorn, but it will accompany us through the Aquarian age when there is so much emphasis on a group progress. Really, that is the method of the planetary logos at this time. The method of single initiation is no longer sufficient, so people will be passing before the initiator in groups. You know, what the inner mechanism of that may be, we don't really know. It may be some sort of simultaneous psychic enactment, symbolized to each initiate in a certain way, as if they were all simultaneously in the presence of the initiator. Well, more of that will be revealed as during the Aquarian age the first and second initiations are given publicly. We're certainly not at the time when the third initiation can be given publicly. Well, we're not yet at the time when the first or second can be, but in the Aquarian age we will be, and perhaps, who knows, there may be a more public giving of this higher initiation in the age of Capricorn, which is the sign correlated with it. So the law of elevation, we're climbing the mountain of initiation here, and the consciousness is certainly elevated in the energy system. And the mountain and the goat, well, you would also think the mountain and the unicorn would be there. Capricorn energy under the first ray does press forward. The seventh ray is a reflection of the first ray. And the great factor of evolution is involved. In a way, it's connected with the third aspect of the will, which is the will to evolve. At least Capricorn is one of those signs connected with the third aspect of the will as well as the first. And maybe, you know, if there is a seventh aspect of the will with that as well. This law begins to function and to be registered in the personal consciousness, because so much goes on above before there is registration. Before there is registration, there is much happening above. When the aspirant has achieved certain definite realizations and knows certain ideals as fact in his experience, he has proven the factuality of that which heretofore was simply an ideal or theory. And these realizations, or let's bold those, and these ideals might be listed in a very simple way and would then connote to the superficial student the simplest achievement of the probationary path. So, you know, DK, DK is always having us go deeper. It would, however, be well if we could grasp this fact with clarity, that this simple formulation of requirements and their achievement within the aspirant's consciousness demonstrate as the outer and veiled reaction of his mind to some deeper esoteric cosmic truth. I mean, that which occurs within the consciousness is not necessarily the fact of that which is happening. That which occurs in the consciousness can be but the symbolization of that which is really happening. And thus it is, we never see in our present state of human consciousness reality as a whole, or as it really is. What we see is the way that reality is outpictured in our own consciousness. It's kind of a phenomenological view. Reality is one thing and the phenomena of consciousness another. This statement contains the very essence of the esoteric knowledge. So what is represented to us is not necessarily the real, to us is not necessarily the real, but an outpicturing or symbolization of that which is real and cannot yet be apprehended as it is. An outpicturing. So this statement contains the very essence of esoteric knowledge. The quite ordinary formulations of loving living and of daily instinctive self-sacrifice suffer from being so vitally familiar, and yet, if we could only realize that they are only the outer fringe of the deepest world truths, so though they seem familiar to us, they represent that which is not at all familiar. And by their very familiarity, we cease to be interested and then cease to trace our way into the far deeper world truths. They are the ABC of esotericism. So let's put them down. You know, the loving living and daily instinctive, meaning we don't have to think about it all the time. It simply occurs. Daily instinctive self-sacrifice. They are the ABC of esotericism, and through them and only through them shall we arrive at the words and sentences which are in their turn the essential key to the highest knowledge. So fulfill first that which is familiar, and it will lead to far greater depths. Certain words of power will emerge when the ways of life conveyed by the lesser words are fulfilled. Okay. A brief example will serve to illustrate this, and we can then consider some simple facts which indicate that the aspirant is beginning to function as a soul and is ready for conscious life in the kingdom of God. A brief example will serve to illustrate this, and then we can then consider some simple facts which indicate that the aspirant is beginning to function as a soul and is ready for conscious life in the kingdom of God. The disciple in training for these higher realizations is urged to practice the faculty of discrimination. That's found, at least in one of its guises, on the fourth subplane of the mental plane, and also it's one of the key methods for achieving the fourth initiation through the use of two very discriminative planets, Mercury and Saturn. We are urged to practice discrimination, and in the law of repulse it was discrimination, dispassion, discipline, and decentralization. Discrimination. Okay. Well, I think I better... There it is. Discrimination, dispassion, discipline, and decentralization. We remember that in relation to the law of repulse, discrimination was very important. So if we practice these four, we will automatically be dealing with the law of repulse. We will somehow invoke its expression. And so we have been urged to do this. The initial and normal interpretation of the immediate effect of the practice is to teach the disciple to distinguish between the pairs of opposites, which, let's say, for practical purposes here, this means the soul and the personality. Yet just as the disciple in his early training discovers that the discriminating process has naught to do with the choice between recognized evil, so-called, and recognized good, see a greater understanding of what evil really is, kind of gives one a reservation when deeming it to be evil per se. It has to be understood in the larger context. Yet just as the disciple in his early training discovers that the discriminating process has naught to do with the choice between recognized evil, so-called, and recognized good, but concerns the more subtle pairs of opposites, such as, let's say, right and wrong silences, right and wrong speech. Good and evil are just broad strokes by comparison. Right understanding and right indifference and their opposites. So the man who is reacting to the higher laws discovers that the discrimination to be shown is again still more subtle. So a word can apply to a number of different levels. A process can apply. We're not necessarily discriminating here between simply the soul and the personality, or between good and evil, or between many of these different types of possible behaviors. So the discrimination is again still more subtle, and is for the bulk of aspirants in the world today still a meaningless objective. Maybe for the disciple it is no longer so. The pairs of opposites in a broad sense, vertically at least, means soul and personality. It can mean also soul-infused personality versus the higher pole, the monad, the spirit itself. So this higher type, this type of discrimination, is not even being evoked. It is that which must not he shown. See, this is one of those mistakes in the transposition to the CD-ROM. It is that which must be shown in relation to the following subtle contacts. So, and this is a list of how a word can mean more than initially it seems to mean. So, discriminations that we would have to go through. So this is a list of heightening discriminations. The vibration of the soul itself, between soul and personality, the vibration of the inner group with which he is even unconsciously, even if unconsciously affiliated. So this could be, in one sense, a kind of ashramic vibration, the vibration of the master as the focal point of the group, and discriminating that from the group itself. It would be a more intense presence. His ray vibration as sensed via his soul and his master. Okay. And maybe, even as administered or released through the Chohan, who is the head of the greater ashram of which he is a part. the vibration resulting from the interplay between his soul and his personality. So neither all personality nor all soul. The three different vibrations of his vital body, his emotional body, and his mind, how attentive we must be to these different vibrations, and be able to tell the difference between them. The vibration of the groups or group with which he must work upon the outer plane, the soul vibration of other people whom he contacts, and the vibration of such a group as the new group of world servers. Well, you know, it can all pretty easily be lumped into one sensing, as for instance, I just sensed something higher. And yet for the true occultist, with discrimination keenly operative, all of these factors and more, the vibration of the hierarchy as a whole, the vibration of the Chohan of his ray, the vibration of the hierarchy as a whole, the vibration of his soul group on the higher mental plane, the vibration of the larger egoic group, the vibration of the Christ, the vibration of his various triadal vehicles in formation. Just as we recognize other people by their face and can tell one person from another, so we have to be able to discriminate or tell the difference between these very subtle sources, these subtle vibrations. So, we cannot simply look at a word and think that it means only one thing. Certainly not in occultism. So, as DK says here, these are only some instances of the types of discriminations which are required. So we begin to see how very much at the beginning of the occult path we actually are. If we're not able to make these discriminations, we are at the beginning of the occult path and have to have a much sharper interior sensor for discriminating. These he will learn to distinguish instinctively when he is further developed. Well, that's the fact, and we have to be humble about our present position. I would like to remind you that it is when we try to discriminate entirely mentally that the problem seems insuperable. There's more to it. There's more ways to register difference, right? There are other ways to register difference. When the rule of the soul and the recognition of the soul have been firmly established, these different recognitions become instinctual reactions. Okay, we can say here, because the soul knows, and the mind has to slowly reason as it attempts to separate one thing from one thing from another. If these programs are ever edited, then maybe sneezes and other strange sounds will be eliminated. Intuitional response is the name we give to the instinctual life of the soul. Of course, the true intuition is found on the Buddhic plane, but then in a way so is the soul. Not the sheath of the soul, but the soul itself as the triad which can function irrespective of the causal body. So intuitional response is the name we give to the instinctual life of the soul, the higher correspondence to the instinctual life of the human body, which seeks some sort of temporary satisfaction in response to its urges. So let's say there is that within the soul which can, as we say, tell the difference. In the above paragraphs, we have a simple summary of some of the deeper significances of the simple injunction, let us learn to discriminate. Let us always deal with levels, you know. A word has multiple possible levels of application. So in occultism, let us always think of levels. Learn to discriminate. And then we have to say, okay, any word of significance can be interpreted on a number of different levels. How much we have we truly understood this injunction? Intellectually, the mind may give assent. Practically, in terms of what we are actually able to do, the words frequently mean nothing, he tells us. Okay. Do they signify to us the power of the soul to separate vibrations into differing categories, and yet we are told that the soul knows naught of separation? Well, you know, what we have here is variety within an unbroken unity. Such are some of the paradoxes of esotericism to the initiate. All right, going on then. Okay. The law of group progress can only begin to have a conscious effect. Now, you know, this is important because the laws of the soul do have a kind of unconscious prompting which leads forward towards the eventually conscious effect. So there is an initial unconscious conscious directing as these laws assert an unknown influence. But it can only have a conscious effect on the life of the disciple who has been pledged and accepted. And I think this is really important. The disciple who has been pledged and accepted. And what we learn here is that some of these higher laws, well, at least the conscious effect, I think we can gather that this may also be true of the law of repulse as a triadal law. Maybe this is true of all the triadally originating laws. Maybe the law of sacrifice can have a conscious effect before one is a truly accepted disciple. One can become a pledged disciple before one is an accepted disciple, but when one is an accepted disciple, one is also, of course, sustaining the pledge. So some of these higher laws seem to be applicable to those who have made a fair bit of progress in the life of a conscious soul awareness. When he has established certain rhythms, when he is working effectively along certain well-recognized group lines, and when he is definitely and in understanding consciousness, preparing for the expansions of initiation, then the law begins to sway him and he learns to obey it instinctively, intuitively, intellectually. These are the three different levels of possible response. So responding from the form, from the triad, and from the mind, or let's call it from the soul triad, and then of course from the from the lower mind, now rather illumined. Let's call it now increasingly illumined. Okay. So when he has established certain rhythms, when he is working effectively along certain well-recognized group lines, he is definitely an understanding consciousness preparing himself for the expansions of initiation. Then this law begins to sway him, and he learns to obey it instinctively, intuitively, and intellectually, the three levels of his being. The intuitive response is coming from the triad, which is an expression of the monad, the intellectual response from the mind, and the instinctual response, in this case, from the personality itself. Or, let's say, from the maybe the lower aspects of the personality, though he has been talking here about soul instinct as well, intuition as a soul instinct. It is through obedience to this law that preparation for initiation is instituted by the disciple. So it's as if initiation is a group process, whether or not we are speaking about conscious group initiation. So when we have the group in mind, and when we advance with consideration of the group always and our impact upon the group, we are working with the first parts of this law. It is for obedience to this law that preparation for initiation is instituted by the disciple. The previous sentence is so worded because it is important that all should grasp the self-initiated necessity of initiation. One is not initiated because someone else takes the initiative. One has to originate this movement towards initiation in relation to the group. So it is through obedience to this law that preparation for initiation is instituted by the disciple. He begins to obey the law of group progress as he is working towards initiation, though that working towards is inaugurated, instituted, initiated by himself. So do we understand this importance? Some of the effects earlier mentioned in the initial discussion of this fifth law can here be enumerated, and let us not forget their esoteric and unseen significances. So he's always asking, let us think with subtlety, S-U-B-T-L-T-Y, subtle, B-T-L-E, oh well, let's get it this way, subtlety. Let us think with subtlety and of the various levels which can be involved. One wants to go over and over these things because so that they really, really sink in. Only the disciple who is pledged and accepted. So it's as if that only sometime from the time of the midway point between the first and second initiation can this law really apply, because accepted discipleship does not come in before that time. Accepted discipleship does not come into play before the midway point between the first initiation and the second initiation, and probably closer to the second. So when he established certain rhythms, when he is working meditative rhythms, rhythms of service to the group, when he is working effectively along certain well-recognized group lines sanctioned by hierarchy, and I suppose recognized by himself and others, And when he is definitely and in understanding consciousness preparing himself for the expansions of initiation, because he has to do this on his own initiative, then the law begins to sway him, and he learns to obey it instinctively. He will be elevated. He will be swimming with the group. He will have, at the second degree, entered the stream and will be working forward with the group. After all, this law, interestingly, is connected with the, well, it's the seventh ray, but it's the seventh ray as it's connected with the second ray and with the second law. And the second law, of course, suggests the second initiation, where one is swept by the current of the group with which one is cooperating towards a higher state. So it is through obedience to this law that preparation for initiation is instituted by the disciple. So if he is not obedient to this law, then he is not really instituting, self-instituting preparation for initiation. Okay, so do we understand this importance, the self-initiated necessity of initiation? Do we understand this, he's saying? Now, some of the effects earlier mentioned in the initial discussion of this fifth law can here be enumerated. Let us not forget their esoteric and unseen significance. 1. The disciple will then learn effectively to decentralize himself. Now, we remember this was one of the 4 words which, well, should we say, invoked the law of repulse, and it is related to, at first, to the personality. We seek our center, seek our true center as the observer outside the personality. So he will learn to decentralize himself, and what does this mean? In effect, he will ask nothing for the separated self, but all things asked will pertain to the fulfillment of the plan, to the fulfillment of the plan, and with the self in mind only as a useful instrument. One can therefore easily see why aspirants are taught to pledge allegiance to their higher self, and to all this I most solemnly pledge myself, invoking my higher self, you know. I play my part with stern resolve, with earnest aspiration, I look above, I help below, and so forth. One can therefore easily see why aspirants are taught to pledge allegiance, not to a flag, I guess, but to the higher self, and to forswear all claims of the separated self. Can you imagine when the Pledge of Allegiance in future esoteric days will be to the higher self? The Pledge of Allegiance in future esoteric days may be to the higher self. Right now, of course, it's on a lower turn of the spiral, and it is to the flag which represents the idealism of the people. One can see also why so many react against it. You know, that, and DK has said that, that when we react against that mantram, I play my part with stern resolve, with earnest aspiration, I look above, I help below, I dream not, nor I rest, I toil, I serve, I reap, I pray, I mount the cross, I tread the way, I tread upon the work I do, I mount upon my slain self, I something desire, well, rejecting all reward. Well, now I have to go looking for it, don't I, to get it right? I tread upon the work I do. Tread upon the work I do. I mount upon my slain self. I forego peace, I forfeit rest, and in the stress of pain I lose myself and find myself, and enter into peace. And then added to this in some of these sayings is, to all this I most solemnly pledge myself, invoking my higher self. I mount upon my slain self. Well, you know, when you forget a line of something you think you've memorized, pay attention to the line, because there may be psychological resistance within which prevents one from remembering it so quickly. This is the technique of associated word association. I'm remembering this movie about Carl Jung, and he had 5 children with his wife. He was having some difficulties in his marriage, but she was adamant that she would not divorce him. It was so interesting, and he was giving her a word association test, and you know, there would be the word and she would speak, and the word and she would speak, and then he spoke the word divorce. Long hesitation on her part, and she said after a while, no. So obviously there was all kinds of inner psychological turmoil that dealt with her inability to speak a response. One can therefore easily see why aspirants are taught to pledge allegiance to their higher self and forswear all claims of their separated self. The self is merely an instrument, and if we can view the self as an instrument and not as our self at all, the lower self, then we have the right attitude toward it, and we can equip the instrument as is needed to carry out the task of ourselves, who are now identified as the soul. So one can see why so many react against it, against the pledge of allegiance to the higher self. And I think DK was just speaking of, in this Laws of the Soul, he was speaking of this particular mantram, I play my part with stern resolve, and so forth. Very six-ray mantram, he was just speaking of that. And he was saying, yes, if you resist this, well then ask yourself why, and maybe it will tell you where you stand. I remember how eager I was to say this when I first joined the Arcane School, because they brought this in right at the very beginning, and I said, oh, this is wonderful, you know, and I learned it and I repeated it with full six-ray fervor, and only to realize how very, as time went on, how very hard it was really to live what could be so zealously spoken. Sadder but wiser. Okay, they are not ready for it, and such a pledge therefore acts as a great discriminating agent. When people say, I won't pledge, I won't give an oath. You know, and oaths are required at initiation. It's part of every initiation. So I've met people, my friends and so forth, who just are right up against it. No, I won't give an oath to that. I won't do that. Well, has that been acting as a great discriminating agent, keeping them out of the next field of contact and of service they might otherwise have entered? To those for whom the standard of selflessness is set too high, it will neither be understood nor desired. A standard of non-egoity in the usual sense, the lower ego. Therefore the unready criticize it. Later they will come back and with understanding take this obligation, the allegiance to the self, in the light. So there is always later. And I'm sure that many of us coming back and at this time able to pledge allegiance to the higher self have repudiated it in the past. So we cannot somehow compliment ourselves on our high state, because it was probably won through previous failure. Okay, so where are we here? This was A. The disciple must learn to effectively decentralize himself, so he will ask nothing for the separated self, and this also means that his eyes are towards the light and not towards desire for contact with the master. It's a very personal attitude to desire contact with the Master for its own sake and for the comfort it might bring. This therefore rules out all that spiritual selfishness which has been expressed by the desire innate and deep for recognition by one of the great ones. Well, this is how it is at first, and, as I said, I have friends of friends who are on first name basis with Sanat Kumara. He's not Sanat Kumara, he's hi Sanat, well, okay, later, come back later with greater realization having emerged from the field of glamour. So this therefore works out as that spiritual selfishness, rules out that spiritual selfishness which has been expressed by the desire innate and deep for recognition by the great ones. So interesting, Alice Bailey didn't have that at all, Basically, when DK first contacted her, she says, I'm no darn psychic, She immediately distrusted the contact, and it had to be proven to her. So she was certainly one of the sadder but wiser discriminating ones. When this freedom from the personal is found, then the Master can dare to make a contact and to establish a relation with the disciple. Otherwise, the glamour would be only increased. Otherwise, the potential, the glamour, the existent, personal glamour would only be increased. So the Master has to be very careful about contact and approach, lest the person's lower ego is flattered and inflated. And he would do more harm than good if he approached too early. And just think about the Christ when he thinks about, when shall I approach? Well, humanity has to be in a certain effective condition before he can approach. Otherwise, he would just worsen the condition. I'm remembering, is it Master Hilarion in The Light of the Soul saying that, well, if you're climbing the ladder, and it's really an electric ladder, and your feet are not clean, then your feet will be frozen in mud on the rungs of the ladder. The electricity will cake the mud that's still on your feet, symbolizing impurity. And so, don't put the miry foot on the ladder to heaven. Hence all of the cleaning up that we have to do. In the beginning we don't think we have to do it because it's simply, simply intellectual exercise. Let's get on with it. But maybe not. And it's better to follow the advice of those who have gone before than to lose a great deal of time by the pride which refuses to follow that advice. All right, now number 2. So what was number 1, and what's it all about here? Some of the effects mentioned earlier in the initial discussion of this 5th law can here be enumerated. Effects of either preparing for it or being involved in this 5th law. He will have learnt to serve instinctively. Well, we remember that intuition is an instinct of the soul. That's one of the ways he describes it. Is an instinct of the soul, a soul instinct. There are different ways of describing, but remember the soul can be a higher thing than that which is simply found upon the higher mental plane. He may and usually does need to learn to discriminate in his service. So we'll say here, what really is my true service. But his attitude to life and towards all men is a divine rushing forth to aid, to lift, to love, and to succor. Well, that's a tall order, isn't it? And we have to test ourselves against this requirement. Test ourselves against this requirement. His attitude to life and towards all men is a divine, see, is already having to do with the higher levels of the triad, a divine rushing forth to aid, to lift, to love, and to succor. And one is reminded of the hierarchy as being a great vortex of activity, not the peaceful, I want to call it archetypal peacefulness of Shambhala. He did distinguish between the activity of hierarchy and the, I don't know, is it fixity, archetypal fixed purposefulness of Shambhala, the archetypal realm? I pause on this one, and I ask, divine rushing forth to aid, to lift, to love, and to succor. This is so Christ-like, isn't it? So Christ-like, and what a test for all of us. Every once in a while, DK says, well, the master no longer drops that hint in your consciousness per se, at least not under normal circumstances. Now you read the mass of material to which you may be exposed, and the hint will pop out at you. That which is for you will rise off the page, and you will grasp your own hint from the mass of material that you are reading or studying it. This, for me, is a hint. Okay, and then the third factor here, he will have learned to use the mind in two directions, increasingly at will and instantaneously. So this reminds of the dual use of the mind in Scorpio, but also relating to Janus, the two-faced god. In this particular case, being two-faced is not a bad thing. It's looking above and looking below and helping below at the same time. Sometimes we say, oh, well, Gemini people are two-faced, but, that's a lower turn of the spiral. They are able to look in both directions simultaneously. So what we're looking at here is the effects earlier mentioned. That's what we're talking about. They were earlier mentioned in this section under rule number, law number 5. Up here. I'm not going to go back there. There's such a thing as just trying to be too sure. So he can cast the searchlight of the mind into the world of the soul. Certainly once that mind has been focused on the level of discrimination on the fourth subplane, and know and recognize those truths which must for him become his experienced knowledge. So that's one use of the mind. Learn to use the mind in two directions, okay? And then what else can he do? He can also cast it out into the world of illusion and dispel the glamours of the personal. Well, this is very much the Scorpio ability, to look down and also then to look upward towards the Buddhic plane, because remember that we're dealing with Mercury, and Mercury has its highest position in Scorpio, a good position in Gemini, but its highest position in Scorpio. And when he can do that, then he begins to dispel the world glamours, not just his own personal glamours, because he's dealing with the plan. He's in that part of the Aclery process, the Aclery process, ACLRI, where the plan is R, or revealed to him. So these are some things that can happen with these effects that relate to the law number, rule, well, I guess it's law number 5. Some of the effects in the initial discussion of this fifth law can here be enumerated. Decentralization, nothing for the separated self. His eyes are towards the light, not towards the master. He's learning to serve instinctively. He can use his mind in two directions, above into the realm of the higher mind, where the truths which he must make his experience knowledge will appear to him, and also out into the world of illusion. Sometimes it does help, doesn't it, to recap, so we can see and understand what has gone before and see it all at once. Okay, so here we have something called the links of the world groups. This is all under the law of group progress. It would not be possible to go on listing, it would be possible to go on listing the various developments which indicate to the onlooking hierarchy that a disciple or a group of disciples is now ready for more light. We cannot just say more light, because it can totally disorganize the mind, the instrument. Light has to be assimilated, and that which is seen in the light has to be applied. So, you can't give all, and you can't give it all at once, and you have to be very careful about what you say and how you say it, so thinking that it has to be received in the right manner. The major indication is, however, their reaction to the law of group progress. So basically, DK has been listing the qualities, has been listing the qualities in the disciple which indicate that he is ready for more light. Every initiation adds more light, and it is the great quest for light that is characterizing life on this particular planet. So, but the major indication is their reaction to the law of group progress, and that will tell whether he is ready for more light. So this seems to be the most important indicator of the readiness for more light. It is this law which is the coming new law to be sensed by the world disciples. It doesn't only mean by those of the third degree. It also means disciples in the world. We have to be very careful. Sometimes this world disciple means technically the disciple of the third degree. Sometimes it means world disciples. It means those who are disciples and are working in the world. So it is this law which is the coming new law to be sensed by the world disciples, and which is already becoming more effective in its potency, even though it will not be realized by humanity, not just the disciples, for a long while yet. So we might say humanity. So humanity must pass through the Saturn decanate of Aquarius with all its testing and discipline. And then the readiness is more likely to demonstrate. Pass through the Saturn decanate of Aquarius. It will bring into activity the work of the world groups, which are forming, but many of them are selfish now. But increasingly we do see the selfless groups forming. In the past, groups have been formed for mutual benefit, for mutual interest and study, for mutual strengthening. Well, let's just say, especially for the individuals within the groups. This has been their glory and also their curse. For great and good though their motives have been, yet these groups have been basically and primarily selfish. And some of them are outstandingly selfish. When Aquarius can be an extremely selfish sign. It's amazing what can be called together under Aquarius. The whole Nazi Party received its confirmation in Germany, the Third Reich, under Aquarius, of all things. So yet these groups have been basically and primarily selfish, with a form of spiritual selfishness most difficult to overcome. Yes, he knows whereof he speaks. He's seen this in disciples over the many, many years, and calling for the expression of true discrimination to which I have earlier referred. I suppose a discrimination between spiritual ambition and true selfless service. Such groups have ever been, well, what does he say, the occult groups, the most glamored of all groups. So we ought to pause on that one. Such groups have ever been battlegrounds wherein the least able and the least integrated had been absorbed and standardized or regimented, and the most powerful have dominated eventually. And the indefinite ones have been eliminated or rendered totally quiescent. So this has been the story of many groups heretofore. And it has not been real group consciousness or real group progress. There has been an artificial hierarchy based on personal power, and a reflection of totalitarianism, really, where there's a top-down type of imposition of that which the strongest think upon the less integrated and weaker, less certain members. The successful group in the Piscean past has eventually turned out to be one composed of kindred souls who are all thinking alike. Think about Lincoln's cabinet. I think he deliberately took aboard many of his former opponents so he would have opposite points of view to deal with. But I think many presidents have selected cabinets of those who think like themselves to eliminate friction with their own ideas. So composed of kindred souls who are all thinking alike because no one thinks with intuition. Which would reveal the truth, but who are governed by some school of thought or because some central figure in the group dominates all the rest, hypnotizing them into an instinctual, quiescent, static condition. So, warning to all of us who are in the position of apparently leading groups. If we have a central position in any of that type of group work, we had best be careful. It is the age of Aquarius Leo, or Leo Aquarius, Aquarius Leo, and there will be these central figures, as Alice Bailey, a Leo rising person, was, and as HPB was, and so forth, and as Helen O'Rourke was. These are central figures, but one must be careful of group totalitarianism, forcing all to think as the most powerful think. So this may be to the glory of the teacher of the group, but it's certainly not to the glory of God. All right, well, we have some very interesting thoughts there. Again, the contrasts are offered. And the negative is shown to set up a better appreciation of the positive. Well, I think this will be the end of Laws of the Soul webinar commentaries number, well, is it 22? Is it 21? What is it? I always manage to forget this, don't I? Well, I guess it's 22, the end of 22, which is good to know. And apparently we made some progress there. And we're in esoteric psychology, EP2, and on page 179, and we will be beginning with Laws of the Soul Webinar Commentaries number 23, EP2, page 179. Okay, friends, I think I had high hopes of going on tonight until the wee hours and finishing the law of group progress. But I'm not sure that that is going to happen. Sometimes one has to be alert in order to make these programs. Let us see. Let us see. So we will see you either shortly or tomorrow, continuing with the law of group progress. So very important a law in the Aquarian age, leading, I think, even to a greater importance in the age of Capricorn, which rules this law. Specifically, that really will be the age of initiation. So, see you shortly or not. Bye-bye.